Thank you. I was looking over the summer series, what you guys are talking about, as I was trying to get my thoughts together, and I was looking at the list of speakers, and I realized there are two different criteria, and you had to meet one of two criteria for being asked to speak here by Josh Clem. You either had to have something relevant to say, or you knew Josh in college. I knew Josh in college. But I'm happy to be here. I've known about this congregation for a long time through Christ Teens, through Camp Caudle, some familiar faces out in the crowd. So thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. Josh and I negotiated and decided we were going to talk about culture, current culture, teen culture, and then move into having spiritually healthy families. So that's where we're headed tonight. If you have a Bible, Deuteronomy 6, that's going to be the place we're going to start. It's going to be the place we're going to finish. Who here can already tell me what Deuteronomy 6 is about? Raise your hand if you know. Deuteronomy 6. Okay, raise your hand if you don't know. Just making sure this mic's working. Okay, Deuteronomy Chapter 6. That's where we're going to be here in a little bit. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I grew up in Alabama. I have a wonderful wife. We've been married a long time. Probably should know the amount of time, but she's not here, so we won't worry about that. I've got 4 kids, and oldest one 8, youngest one 16 months. So here's what I know. I am experienced enough to know anything I say, I'm probably going to eat my words on it. Like I know that for sure. Beyond that, hopefully God's grace will guide us through tonight. Got a question for you. I noticed we've already discussed it. Who is sitting on the second row? The cool people, right? There was a rule, apparently. Somebody made a rule, cool people sit on the second row. What would happen if I said, okay, right now, I want everybody to go sit with your family? What would happen? I'm not asking anyone to move, but what would happen? Would that go over well? Yeah? I'm guessing I might hear a few, Do you think I might hear some, I think I might. We've done a really good job of not being families. And there's a time and a place for that. I think it's very important to have a village that can help raise your child. I think that's very important. One of the most formative books I ever read is called Parenting Beyond Your Capacity. And the premise of the book is, if you think you can raise your kids on your own, you need to read this book. You need more. And so the idea behind the book is you go and you find one person or 2 people or 3 people and you say, listen, I'm pretty good at this and I'm pretty good at this. I stink at this. Can you speak that into my child's life? Right? So there is a time and a place for introducing mentors into our families to overcome deficiencies, if you will. But I don't think that should be our primary mode, right? I think there's something about our families that sometimes we miss. Let me say that in another way. Can you think of a context, of a situation, of a place or a time where in our culture, okay, not necessarily the church setting, but in our culture where it is expected that generations are going to mix? Can you think of many places where that is the expectation, that the older is going to be with the younger? We can think of a few, I'm guessing. We're just not saying them or letting me know that. We can think of a few, but aren't most, at least of our institutions, centered around being with people like you? That's the way we do most things. School, right? College, a lot of ways work, or if they don't start out being similar, we assimilate ourselves into being the same. And one of the things that's desperately missing in our culture as a whole, but even in our Christian families is this interaction between moms and dads and sons and daughters. Man, cool people, turn your phones off if you need to, whoever may have your phone. Okay, so if I said sit with your family, I'm guessing there would be some groans, there would be some murmuring, there would be some complaining, because the expectation is that that's not normal. And I'm not just describing the world. I'm talking about the teenagers that I talk to. I've got one family in particular that they're real easy to use as an example. I was eating lunch with some teenagers, and I shared the story of my 6-year-old daughter. She's feisty, and I love it. But she's feisty, and one of the things she loves to do when she's upset is slam the door. Got any door slammers among us? She loves to slam the door. And I was, telling some silly story about that slamming the door. And of course, I tell my 6-year-old, we don't do that, right? We don't slam doors. Because if we slam doors, the consequence is, what is the consequence for slamming doors? In my house, it's not time out. It is, you take the door off. The door goes away, right? I feel like that's a natural consequence. And I was telling this story, and this teenager, 17-year-old girl, what? Why would you do that? That's a violation of her privacy. And that just, let me show you what I did in my mind. I just got right up here on my high horse, on my soapbox, and I said, let's talk about privacy for a while. I wish next week I'll be back and we'll talk about privacy. But I think one of the things that we don't really understand well is this concept of privacy. Cool people? Privacy is overrated. It's overrated. When you have your own children, you will think differently about it. But I think we're out of balance on when you need privacy and why you need privacy and even what privacy is. So I'm telling this anecdotal story, and she is just, I can't believe you would do that. And so she has a trump card on me. The first thing she says is, well, so you just want them to change clothes in front of everybody? I said, of course not. I'm not taking the door off of the bathroom, right? Just of the room that she slammed the door. And so she's, well, I was like, okay, hold on. Why does this frustrate you so much? Why does this bother you so much? I said, tell me what happens in your home. She says, well, when I get home from school, I put my backpack down in the kitchen and I go to my room. And my brother goes to his room, and my other brother goes to his room, and my mom's in her room, and then my dad is in the living room on the computer. And I said, well, when you go in your room, what happens? Close the door. Close the door, close the door, close the door, close the door. I was like, well, we have a different philosophy on family. We want our rooms to be small, and you're only in there to sleep. The rest of the time, we're together. What? You're together? I mean, it was literally making her pull back from the idea of the home environment being about the family being together. Now, I've picked a fairly extreme example for our youth ministry context, but I think there's a lot of similarities in what goes on everywhere. The baseline, the normal isn't that families interact. Okay, there's this idea of let's separate, okay, for school, for whatever it is, and even within our own homes. Well, there's some negatives there. We're disconnected, right? The older are not teaching the younger. Here's another really big negative. The younger aren't teaching the older. Now, I'm not going to say what happened earlier, but I was standing really close to right here, and I heard someone say something about Snapchat, and then I heard a grandmother say, what's that? And in my mind, I was thinking, this would be a great opportunity for the younger to teach the older, right? I mean, that would work. So too often, we're disconnected, right? We don't have the older teaching the younger. We don't have the younger teaching the older. And we're missing a lot. All right, in our home dynamics, in our culture dynamics, we are private. We are separated. So let's just talk about some generational differences. Does anybody know what generation you're in? I'm looking at my my cheat sheet here. Raise your hand if you know what generation you are labeled as a part of. Right, okay, put those hands down. Raise your hand if you don't know. Raise your hand if you don't know. Okay. Mr. George, what year were you born?
86.
He was born in 1986. Can you believe it? That makes him a dreaded millennial, right? He's a millennial. What year were you born in? What's your name? Aiden was born in 2004. Now, I think I may have most of you stumped. Raise your hand if you know what generation Aiden is in. Raise your hand if you think you know what generation Aiden is in. So in popular culture, I think everybody just assumes Aiden is a millennial too. But he's not. He's not. What is he in? No. I am in Generation X. Okay? I was born in 1979. That puts me in Generation X. Mr. George over here, he was born in 1986. So there's two names for his generation. He's a millennial, or he's Generation Y. Okay, X, Y. And then my good lifelong friend, Aiden, he is in Generation, you'll never guess, Z. Generation Z. Okay, and there's already books coming out about Generation Z. There's a lot of ink being spilled about the millennials, right? Anybody get on Facebook and see somebody that hates the millennials? Anybody seen these articles? Let me read you a quote. Coach Frank Martin. Anybody know who Frank Martin is? Head coach of South Carolina Gamecock basketball team. Some people were dissing his players who are on the line between millennial and Z. You know, talk about their work ethic or different things like that. And so Mr. Martin, he had this, it was a viral quote for a little while. Here's what he said. You know what makes me sick? This is right after the NCAA tournament. It's when I hear grown people say that kids have changed. Kids haven't changed. Kids don't know anything about anything. We, as adults, have changed. So I've really appreciated the, maybe some of the backtracking in the rhetoric about millennials on the social media in popular culture. A whole lot of it now is, you know what? Millennials are exactly what they were trained to be. They're exactly what they were trained to be. And you can blame them for being who they are, which isn't as, there's some negatives, right? But it's not as bad as people want to say. Pros and cons to every generation. We can blame them for who they are, or as the people that raised them, we can think, yeah, this is our bed. We have to lay in it. Right, you see where I'm going here? Let me give you a few quotes I hear from time to time. I have a young teenager. He's in the 8th grade, and my coworker was having a Bible study with him every Monday. After school, he'd pick him up, and they would go to a park, and then they would get some Taco Bell, and they would study the Sermon on the Mount. And they got to that verse that talks about adultery. And Jimmy was like, adultery, what does that word mean? What is that? So we're explaining to him, well, that's where, you know, you're not with your spouse, you know, just giving him the first level definition. Just he didn't know where he was in his understanding. And just real quickly, he said, huh. And what you need to know about Jimmy is his mom lives with a man that's not her husband. He said, well, my mom is in violation here. Well, yeah, You know, it's tricky when you're telling a kid that their parent is wrong. You know, it's some thin ice you want to tread lightly, right? And so we do end-of-the-year reviews, like parent-teacher conferences, and having lunch with the moms. Like, hey, here's something I wanted to bring to your attention. Here's what your son said about this verse and about your family life. And, you know, we're not, and the mom isn't really a part of our congregation. I'm not really trying to get all into your business, but I think just out of respect, you probably want to know, here's what he's thinking about and how he's processing your home environment. And she says, you know, and she was sort of proud of him. I'm glad he connected that. And here's what I tell him about that. And you know what she said, right? I tell him, I heard it, do as I say, not as I do. I tell him that. You know, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I mean, I guess that's better than nothing, but what's he gonna take home from that? What's he gonna take home? What's he really gonna learn? Is he gonna learn from what you say, or is he gonna learn from what you do? When I was in college, I had a job at Harding Academy. My job was to do whatever they didn't want to do, basically. I was there for like 2 hours in the middle of the day, and so I would sit at the front desk, and then I would drive over and get the mail and bring it and hand out the mail. And then my favorite part was I would put all the milk out, right? I would have to get the milk and take it to all the kids, and then I would go do recess duty. All right, and it was the best job I ever had. I was in charge of recess for all these kids. It was wonderful. Well, there was a young man in the 6th grade. My brother was the 6th grade teacher. This young man was in the 6th grade. And I didn't know at the time what his situation was, but here's how he walked, all right? So he, you know, both his feet, and then this leg was just sort of turned out just a little. And when he walked, he kind of did this thing, right? And so, you know, I'm in recess, and he's not really playing with the other kids. So I went to one of the other teachers. I was like, hey, help me out here. What's the expectation here? What's his condition? You know, how can I help him? What do I need to do in terms of that? And they're like, well, he has no condition. There's nothing wrong with him. It's like, right. I know there's nothing wrong, but why is he walking like that? Is there anything I need to know or do? They're like, no. It's like, well, okay. I mean, what's the deal? Can you give me some information? They're like, well, there's nothing wrong. If you can today, when his mom picks him up, I want you to watch her. Okay. So the minivan comes up, and she comes in to get him. Mom gets out of the car, and I watch her walk. Her leg is kind of like this, and she walks just like this. I say, wait. What? So there's nothing wrong with her either. They're like, no, she has some sort of a palsy. There is something wrong with her. He doesn't? Nope. She does, right. But they do the same thing. Why? Because he's grown up watching her. And even though there's nothing wrong with who he is, what he has seen is so much more powerful than what he hears. Here's another one. And this one comes up a lot. A parent will come to me needing to vent. And they'll say, you will never believe what my child did. It's like, I bet I will believe it. Try me. You know, and it's like, they said so-and-so to me, or they back-talked me, or they did this, you know, or they called me that. It's like, yeah. And they said, Shannon, if I would have done that when I was their age, my mama would have. and they're trying to get my sympathy, right? They're trying to get me to be on their team. I'm like, well, let's just be real clear about what's going on here. That child is exactly who you've trained that child to be, right? And the reason you didn't do it was because of how your parent trained you. right? The problem isn't what the kid's doing. It's how you're creating it or teaching it. We had Clay Barty. I don't know if any of you guys know Clay Barty. He's in MFT up at Arding. We had him come and do a men's breakfast for us. And he told us this story. He said, he's a guy's guy, right? He coached football. Yeah, Jake knows Clay. He's a guy's guy, probably not really in tune with his feelings. And we're having this men's breakfast, and he says, guys, I'm just going to be real honest with you. A lot of times I don't understand women, and I have 2 daughters, and a lot of times growing up, I didn't connect with them. I didn't understand them. And he said, let me tell you this story about how my relationship with my daughter changed. One day I picked him up from school, and my daughter, I could tell she was sort of, gruff, and things weren't going well, but the Cubs are on TV. So she takes her backpack and throws it down, and, I go and start watching the Cubs, and she's stomping around, and I'm thinking, she'll probably get over this in a minute. And she doesn't get over it, and so I turned the TV up and kind of waiting on her to get over her problem, because she usually gets over her problem, and said, finally, she came in and sat on the couch by me, and I'm watching the TV, and she's sitting here, so I have to sort of start watching the game out of the corner of my eye, and she's just going on and on about this girl did this to that girl and to me and this and that and the other. And he said, honest as I can be, I don't know what she was talking about. And then I looked over, and I could tell it got more intense. And she goes, and Dad, I hate them. And he said, in that moment, I wasn't engaged in the conversation, and I was being a dumb dad, and I just looked at her, and without really thinking, I said, you know what? I hate them too. And he said, my daughter got up, and she walked to my side of the couch, and she just sat in my lap. And she looked at me, and she just started crying. And I had no idea what was going on. Why is she crying? Oh, no. Is her mother going to find out what I said? He's thinking all the scenarios through. And he said they just sat in silence for a little while. And then all of a sudden, he said the floodgates came open. And she started saying, well, Dad, this girl did this. She did it because she's having a hard time at home, this. And she said, and this girl, she did this. But the real reason she was doing that was because her feelings were hurt because of this and that and the other. And he said, in that moment, I realized my 14-year-old daughter, she knew all the answers to all these problems that she was venting about earlier. I had already parented her. She knew all the answers. Now, the parent in me wanted to tell her, don't hate them. You need to understand. She said, but she knew all that already. She knew all that already. But emotionally, she was in a situation where she couldn't get past it. And what did she need? She needed her dad to connect with her. She didn't need to be parented. She needed to connect with somebody. And the moment she was able to connect, all those emotions, all of a sudden, she had a slot to put them. And then she communicated to me all of that stuff. I don't even have to say anything about it, because she knows what to do. She was just stuck. And we're all sitting there thinking, remember, where are we? A men's father-son breakfast. And he's telling us this story about his connecting with his daughter. And so we're like, okay, that's a great story. And it is a really good story. So one of my friends, he raised his hand, and his 15-year-old son was sitting right next to him. He said, Clay, I really appreciate that story about connecting with your daughter. What do you do with the doofus 15-year-old son that won't say nothing? And what do we all do? Yeah, we know that kid, and we know exactly who he's talking about. But we can all relate to that, right? 15-year-old boy how was your day? Fine. What are you feeling? I'm hungry. What's important to you? I'm sorry, what? You're right. These guys, that's what we do. And so here's my friend, this dad, sort of throwing his son under the bus. And Clay says, you know what? I'm glad you asked that question. Because with boys, it's different. He said, but here's what I've learned. In all of my years working with those 15-year-old boys that won't talk, I think I know why they don't talk. Here's why. They've never seen their dads do it. And I am laughing inside at my friend who thinks he's tattling on his son for the teacher to fix his son. And what does the guy say? Your son ain't the problem. It's you. And he says, and he never called him out like that, but he said, you know what? Typically those sons, they've never seen their dads come home and just tell mom about their day. Or when they're riding it on the way home from practice, they're drilling their kids for answers instead of sharing what they've done. And until you've seen it modeled, you're not going to do it. So what's going on here? We've got all these generational shifts. We got these, times are changing. Times are changing. Raise your hand if you got a phone before you were 18. Your first phone. Your first phone was before you were 18. Raise your hand if your first phone was after you were, your first cell phone was after you were 40. Okay. Did you see how many hands went up? Yeah, his hand's still up. Tim Elmore, he describes it this way. When he's talking about the millennial generation and the kids younger, he says this generation right now, really talking about them, but he says they're the first generation that is not dependent upon the generation older than them for information. All right, did you catch that? This generation and lower, but the millennials, they're the first generation that was not dependent upon the generation above them for information. Can you connect the dots and see some implications there? All right, those of you that got your cell phones after you were 40, when you needed to learn how to change a tire, what did you do? You went to the garage, and granddad or pawpaw or mom, somebody, showed you how to do it. Aiden, what's your friend's name? Abraham? Do you know how to change a tire?
No.
If you wanted to learn how to change a tire, what would you do?
YouTube or ask for help.
No, you wouldn't. He said YouTube or ask for help. He's not asking for help. He's going to YouTube. Now that's a great service. But do you see sociologically what's happening? As a family dynamic, what's happening? We're missing chances to connect. We're missing chances to grow. We're missing chances to relate. Now, for those of you that got the cell phones after you were 40, the solution, I'm not suggesting the solution is that the kids are bad. I'm suggesting you need to learn what Snapchat is. Right?
Can we take your cell phone away?
Jake has a question from the crowd. Let me say that a different way. So this generation, they're the first generation not dependent upon them. Here's the same thing, I think, but said a different way. The generation, him and younger, they don't know anything, but they know how to find out everything. Well, that's a very different world to grow up in. There's no mystery. There's no curiosity. If you need to know something, you find it out. That's a different world than the world you grew up. And there's a disconnect. There's a gulf. There's a gap. So when we talk about having spiritually healthy families, I think we have to start with this realization that there's a gap and that culture has created it, church has created it, our homes have created it. And what are we going to do about it? So Deuteronomy Chapter 6. Verse 1. These are the commands, decrees, and regulations that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you. God told me to teach you all this stuff. You must obey them in the land you are about to enter into. You and your children and your grandchildren must fear the Lord your God as long as you live. If you obey all these decrees and commands, you will enjoy long life. Listen closely, Israel, and be careful to obey. Then all will go well with you, and you will enter into this land of milk and honey. All right, so we're getting the stage set for what these decrees are. And here they are. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands. All right, and then what do you do? All right, here's where we're heading with all this. How are you supposed to teach people about God? Did you hear what he's saying? He's saying, for your kids and your grandkids, here is how you teach them who I am. They don't know who I am. They didn't go through the wilderness like you did. We've been getting real tight in the wilderness. And we got real tight in Egypt. Well, they didn't have those experiences. They have a new set of experiences. They don't know what it's like to not have cell phones. They don't know what it's like. It's different. Here is how you teach them. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home. Talk about them when you are on the road. Talk about them when you're going to bed. Talk about them when you're getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Write them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates. This is good stuff. I mean, if we're looking for a formula for having healthy spiritual families, here it is. What does he say to do? Let's look at it and try to figure out what that means for us. So repeat them again and again and again to your children. Now, I don't know what it's like in the homes here in Russellville, but the homes that I'm aware of in Little Rock, Arkansas, there's very little designated intentional time in our homes to talk about God stuff. We haven't created that time because we are busy. We got stuff to do. We've got this job and this PTA meeting and this lunch to get ready and that room to clean and this wall to paint and that thing to do and this Netflix show to watch 10 consecutive hours of. But we're busy. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home. It's not ambiguous. It's not unclear about when you're supposed to talk about God. Somehow, so we're talking about generations. The generation older than me, church is when you talk about church. And I agree. But all the dads that I knew growing up, they didn't have the foggiest idea how to talk about church stuff at home. They didn't know how to talk about God. They didn't know how to teach us to pray. So my dad, by all accounts, okay, I'm obviously biased, but he was a very godly person. But my early experiences of learning to read the Bible and pray, do you know what they were? It's so weird as I tell this story. It is 100% true, but this is so weird to say out loud. When I would read the Bible at home, I was embarrassed. I didn't want anybody to see me read the Bible. You know why? Because I thought it was bragging. I thought I was being more spiritual than everybody else. And there was this thing about how when you pray, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to hide in your closet and don't let anybody see you doing it. So I didn't. I took that seriously. And nobody ever pulled me aside and said, hey, we can pray together. That's not exactly what that scripture meant. But I spent 18 years thinking I had to hide when I practiced my faith in my own home. Maybe that story is a little more extreme than your setting, but I think there's some truth that applies to all of us. This specifically says when you're at home, talk about it over and over and over again. Review it. Now, it doesn't say preach. It doesn't say lecture, right? Have this conversation. How about this one? We'll do it when you're at home, and then here's a fun one. You need to talk about it when you're on the road. Uh-oh. Now, again, I know I'm going to step on some toes here, but when we get in the car, I'm putting my earphones on, you're turning that screen on. Nobody talk until we get there. I make a lot of mistakes as a parent, but here's one victory I would like to share with you. When we went to buy our minivan for our 4 children, I had this very text in mind when I told the guy, I do not want TVs in my van. I regret that a lot of days. But then I remember this, and I'm glad we don't have it. But here's how crazy that is. The salesman, he couldn't understand. He couldn't understand why I didn't want TVs in my car. He kept saying, are you sure? And it wasn't because he was going to make more money off of it. He was just really curious, like, you got 4 kids, you don't want the screens? I don't understand. See, the world doesn't have a category for how we're supposed to interact. So at home, turn the Netflix off. Turn the music off. Don't go to your room and close the door. Talk. When you're getting up, when you're on the road. How about that one? Okay, so we just talked about when you're on the road, and then this one, when you're going to bed. Now, I'm guessing if you do any of these, it's this one. Because somehow, a lot of us are fine with that. We're fine with praying at meals and at bedtime. We're fine with praying at meals and at bedtime. So we kind of get this going to bed thing. Of course, maybe it's just some quiet things we can do with our kids while they're little. Do you keep that up when they're teenagers? I don't know. And boy, this one really steps on my toes. And when you're getting up. Man, if you knew me at all, don't talk to me till noon. That's just how I'm wired, right? So this one is stepping all over. So I got the minivan thing right. But this morning prayer, this talk about Jesus in the morning, I'm about to go home, think and reevaluate this one. Tie them on your hands, wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Write them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now, I'm going to say something here, and I do not intend this to be political, and I will not talk about politics with you, but there's this big fight going on right now about whether we can have scriptures on this building that's very close to our church building in Little Rock. Right, all sorts of fights about it, and people driving their cars into it. Just craziness about whether the 10 Commandments can be up there. And I don't care what your opinion on that is, but God did say you need to have that stuff up in your house. So before you tell me your opinion on that one, let's go look at your front door. Let's go look at your gate. Let's look at your garage. And let's see if we own this. And then I would love to have that conversation. Because we're going to have spiritually healthy families. It starts at home. It starts at home. A lot of times we're really good at this stuff when they're kids, but when they become teenagers, and I don't understand this. I do understand this, but I don't understand this. In 17 years of doing this, here's a trend. When your children get to be teenagers, you feel like you're not supposed to be around them when they're doing God stuff. Part of that, I think, is the kids are doing this, which they're supposed to do, right? Their task in growing up is to do this to the parents. But the task of the parent of the teenager, I do not think, is to say, okay, let's do it your way for a while. In fact, in the teenage years, I really think that relationship, you have to do more to connect because they're trying to push you away. Now, don't hear me saying you need to be overbearing. You need to find new ways to connect with them on new levels. Don't just bemoan the fact that they're not your little princess anymore and they don't crawl in your lap and they don't tell you everything. You have to find new ways to connect. Here's 4 things, and I don't think this has changed. I read a book, one of the most, I said the other book earlier. Here's another book that just really impacted my thinking about youth ministry. It's not even a youth ministry book, but it's called Raising Self-Reliant Children in a Self-Indulgent World. Right. And it says every teenager needs 4 things. And this book was written 30 years ago, and I think it's true now. It says they need a network of people. It takes a village, right? It takes a village. They need a network of people, and they need a meaningful role. I'll tell you the other 2, and then we'll come back to that one. A network, a meaningful role. They need on-the-job training, and they need parental resources. So this first one, they need a meaningful network. I think if you're here tonight and a part of a church, you appreciate that. Let's skip to number 2. They need a meaningful role. Most of the teenagers I know, and definitely the college people I know, when they think about church, they don't think it matters if they're there or not. Because we've shifted to where they are the consumer, right? They're the customer, and we want to keep them happy. So we create things for them. Now, again, don't hear me wrong. I have professionally done youth ministry for 17 years. I'm not advocating getting away with it, doing away with it. But having meaningful conversations about what we're doing in the home and at church to give them meaningful roles, not token roles, not, okay, you can pass the bread, okay, you can fold the bulletins, but meaningful roles. If they don't do it, nobody does. Because if they don't have that, what do they learn? That they are discretionary, right? They're not essential to the community. There's a really good resource out there. It's called Growing Young. Kara Powell at Fuller Institute. She did this book called Growing Young, but she has a concept in this book, Growing Young. It's called Latchkey Leaders. And she tells a story of a young man that the day he got a driver's license, he showed up at church and they gave him, or showed up at church to pick up a sister or something. And the day school at the church, the lady there said, "You can drive? I need somebody to work here. Can you do it? I need you tomorrow." And he said, "Okay." So she gave him a key, said, "I'll see you in the morning." He got that key. He was in the building. His youth minister saw him and said, "Oh, you like working with people? You like coming to church? I need some help. Can you come back on Sunday and help me?" "Yeah." And gave him a key. "Here's how you get in." And he said the next Monday he showed up and he was walking around the building. And he says he heard God speaking to him. I don't know what that meant, but he heard God speaking to him. And it said, "You're supposed to be here." And that set him on a path of ministry that carried him along. But so do you see the premise here? This latchkey leadership is that when this person felt ownership, when they felt like their role was meaningful, they bought into family. They bought into church on a new level. So our children in our homes need roles. They need these networks. They need roles. They need on-the-job training. All right, don't outsource that to YouTube. Train them to do things. And then they need a parental resource. If I could make you an offer and you can choose one, I'm not, because I can't. But if I said, okay, for your child, you can have either a 34 on the ACT when they get to that age, or they can have a scholarship to play tennis, full scholarship to play tennis at a university, so school will be paid for, or they can know how to pray like nobody else. If you had those three on the table, don't answer. I want you to think. Don't answer out loud. Answer in your mind. Which would you pick? On one hand, I mean, we're in church, right? You know the answer. But on another hand, I mean, you can sort of weigh the pros and cons of these other ones, because those first two options, they got some tangible value, and it can open some doors, and it can put them in situations, and it can solve some problems. What if I tell you this? Maybe I can offer that. I mean, you can take ACT training courses. I mean, you can't guarantee a 34, but you can get better at that. And in fact, I bet a whole lot of people have been in those courses. The sports scholarship, I bet that's a common conversation within your homes and in your context about how you're going to pay for school and why you're going to this practice and why you're doing this and why you need to be there and how this is going to help your future. And there's value in that. But this third one over here, if we really thought that was a value, have we spent much time in that? Have you ever sent your child to a praying camp? Or have you ever sat down with your child and said, hey, let's learn to pray together? I don't know how either. So again, that's sort of a loaded, unfair situation to put you into, but I do it to illustrate this point. We're leading our kids down paths. We are training them to do certain things. Are the things that we're training them to do the weightiest of things, or are they more worldly in nature? The Bible is silent about youth ministry. It doesn't really exist unless you think about, well, there's that one time. There's the one youth minister and the youth group in the Bible. Does anybody remember what book of the Bible that's in? It's in the Gospels, actually. Remember the youth group? Do you remember the youth minister's name? Jesus. And he had 12 people in his youth group. Have you ever thought about it that way? Peter was probably the oldest person in his youth group. How old? People think he was probably about 20, not Peter, Matthew, because he had a job, right? He was a tax collector. He had a job. But all these other guys, what were they? They're fishermen. It doesn't say how old they were, but they were probably 15 to 25, but in that teen range is very, very, very possible. And when he wanted to train people to do something, what did he do? He spent time with them. And he woke them up early to pray. And he knew he was going to leave. And they had to be prepared to do it without him. Well, that's what we're doing, right? As parents, I think we have to assume we're not going to be here very long. And as grandparents, we have to assume we're not going to be here very long, and we've got to get them ready on these weightier matters. I know we're about out of time. I want to tell 2 stories for you parents. I hope I haven't created pressure. God will just help us refocus. If I have created pressure, let me take some of that pressure away by telling you 2 stories. More than anybody else, my dad impacted my life and my faith more than anybody else. Let me tell you the 2 most meaningful incidents I ever had with him. Number 1, when I was 17, okay, I had a girlfriend, and we were one of these on again, off again. We break up a lot, just not really good. Toward the end of the relationship, it was unhealthy, right? I didn't know how to handle it. I mean, in my heart of hearts, I knew we were going to break up, but I didn't know how. I couldn't process that emotion, okay? And one night we were broken up, and I showed up at this, church party. I mean, it was just a normal party. I show up, and nobody would talk to me. My good friends, none of them would talk to me. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then all of a sudden, I realized that my girlfriend was in the other room with another guy, right? Not doing anything weird, but, and so none of my friends knew what to do because they knew I wouldn't like it. And as soon as I realized it, I was making the situation not a fun party, right? So I knew it, so I left. And so I go outside, and I sit in my car, and I as a child, I was very calm, okay? I could handle my emotions very well as a child, but these were new emotions I had never experienced in my life, and so I'm dealing with them, and I don't know what to do with them. So I know I don't need to drive, so I get out of my car, and I walk, and I ran faster than I've ever run for a solid hour and a half. Okay, I know it doesn't make sense, but I just had this crazy adrenaline. I knew I needed to get it out. So I just ran. I got back. I sat down in the car, and I'm still just fighting mad. And I'm sitting there, and I just go, "Argh," like that. I wasn't trying to swing. I wasn't. And the next thing I know, I have shattered my windshield. Like, to pieces. I couldn't do it if I was trying today, okay? It's just one of those crazy moments. I got it just right, and, I did my Bruce Lee thing on this window. And all I can think is, I'm dead. So I have a 30-minute drive home, and I drive home, and I just sit in there, and I'm late for curfew, and I'm just crying, and I'm like, they are going to kill me because I'm late. I've been out, in a place that they had warned me not to go, and what are they going to do to me? So I walk in, and I'm upset, and my mom is there, and she's worried sick, and she's doing her mom thing. I was like, Mom, I don't want to talk to you right now. Can I talk to Dad? Sure. She goes and gets Dad. We go out. We sit on the tailgate. And I tell him the whole story, and I remember it just like it was yesterday. And I just sort of brace when I'm done telling the story. Right? He would have never hit me, but I just felt like I was going to get hit. You know that feeling? And so I just kind of braced. And he said, Shannon, I am so glad you broke your window. What? What? I didn't hear you right. I've got tears in my ears, apparently. What did you say? I'm glad you did this. I said, Dad, I don't understand. You're confusing me. What do you mean you're glad? He said, look, here's the deal. I don't care about this windshield. We'll fix it, and it'll be over. But if this hadn't have happened, you never would have shared for me what's going on in your life. I'm glad you did it. We're going to get it fixed together, and we're going to move on. That forever shaped how I thought about mistakes. It forever shaped how I think about everything. And I so understand that guy that told his girl, I hate him too. He didn't mean that. He was connecting, and my dad was connecting with me. And I know we're out of time, so I'll abbreviate this last story. When I was in college, long story short, I was failing this math class. And I said, Dad, I called home, I'm going to drop this class because if I don't, I'm going to lose all my money. Blah, blah, blah. He said, I really wish you wouldn't do that. And I was like, you don't understand. right? It's going to cost more. It's going to go on my GPA. If I don't drop this class, it's bad in every way. I'm going to drop it. And over the phone, he just says, listen to me. I want you to finish that class. And I said, there's no reason why. If you can give me a reason why, I'll listen to it, but there's no reason why. And he said, I want you to finish that class, and here's why. He says, you've never failed anything in your life. School's always been easy for you, and you've never learned anything. I want you to fail this class, and I want you to learn something. Boom. Mind blown what's going on. All right. Why do I tell you all these two stories? Here's why. Parents, find somebody to connect to. The kids I work with, they are wandering and they're lost, and they are pushing you away, and they need somebody in a creative and gracious and understanding way. Be incarnational, right? John 1:14, Jesus left heaven to dwell with us because we don't know how to get to God. The teenagers that I know, the young children I know, they don't know how to get to God. And unless we go to where they are and connect with them and engage with them, we're going to have a hard time being families that honor God. Let's pray together, and then you will be on your way to shine the light of Jesus.